there's like this display of me.
Okay, the live stream, it's being live streamed
Is it
right
being
now.
live streamed?
Let me click this. So just X that out of the.
Yeah.
All right, we should be live.
I just like, so is the camera right here?
Yes.
This is like, okay, I never
The
know.
owl, we call that
The owl. Well,
She looks
I'm,
like a little owl.
she does look like a little owl. I'm Laurie Brock, and I am very glad to be here at Trimble County Library on this rainy evening. So thank you for those of you who came out in the rain. And for those of you who are watching online, you made a wise choice too. So it's a good night to stay home. But I am here to talk about not staying home. I'm here to talk about travel as an act of faith. Just to give you some perspective of who I am and where I'm coming from, I'm an Episcopal priest, and that's a Christian denomination, and I have been ordained for 20 years, which is a long time. So I come from a Christian perspective about things. My experience in interfaith work, though, certainly shows me that my Jewish friends, my Muslim friends, my Buddhist colleagues, all of those faith traditions have wonderful and valuable insights. So however you need to hear the word when I say God or when I talk about faith, do that, higher power. And also, I always tell people here, take what you need to take and leave the rest on the ground. So but I'm here. So that's who I am. Just wanted to give you some perspective. So I will use some language about Christianity, but thank you for joining us, even if you're a Christian. That's so great, because in fact, some of the best wisdom I've had has come from people who are not Christian. And I actually have books out. I'll give you a little backstory. So Travel as an Act of Faith was actually the proposal for my third book. And as my editor got the proposal on March 1st of 2020. And so he called me and said, I really like this idea, but I'm not sure what the world is going to look like. And of course, the world changed dramatically. And one of the things that changed dramatically is just people couldn't travel. And so we sort of had a conversation about what does it look like to write a book about travel in a time when we just don't know. I mean, and still we know that while people are traveling, it is still considerably less than it was. So what came out of that was my third book, which just got released, called God, Grace, and Horses, and that is available on Amazon or my great preference at your local bookstore. So please support local bookstores, and usually it's in the libraries too. So I'm yay public libraries. But what you're hearing is actually part of the proposal and the book that maybe still will get written, but it got postponed for the pandemic. I like to start with the idea about faith, because my guess is that the big words and the big concepts of life, like love and forgiveness and grace and faith, are words that are much easier to define by examples than to actually say, this is what faith means, or this is what love means. If there are children watching, parents, you can explain this later, but there's a Supreme Court case where one of the justices said, I can't define pornography, but I know it is when I see it. And I think that's true about a lot of the great big emotions in our life. We maybe can't define faith, but we know what it is when we see it. And I can tell you that I'm somebody who's read the word 1,000 times. I can actually tell you the Greek and Hebrew versions of the words that are used in the Old Testament and the New Testament. I can translate that word into all sorts of things. I can tell you what hymns it's in. I can tell you the prayers that we say. But when I think about what faith is to me, it really comes down to sort of two concepts. And thankfully, both of them are mentioned by the Apostle Paul. So the Apostle Paul was a very early disciple of Jesus Christ, and we have many of his letters that he wrote to congregations in the collection of books that we call the New Testament, that are actually the sharings of people's experiences with Jesus. And I love the Apostle Paul because most of his letters start with some version of, what the heck are you people doing? So if you think, by the way, that your church is weird, you are not at all in bad company. But in his letter to the Hebrews, he actually gives us a definition of faith that even people who are not Christian use. I hear this so often, but he says that faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. The second part of that is so much easier for me to grab a hold of because basically conviction is based on experience, and experience gives us something. I know that if I take this water bottle and I turn it upside down, the water's going to spill everywhere. I have faith that that's going to happen because the countless times that I have spilled water on things is quite a few. And I'm sure that you all can think of things that you have faith in because you have experience in that. And that's in some ways the easy part of faith. But then you get to that other one. It's the assurance of things hoped for. I always say that phrase is what I call soft around the edges. Everybody nods, like if I talk about this in a really big group at church, and I'll say, and they're like, oh yeah, I know exactly what that means. And I'll say, so what does that mean? And they're like, I have to check my phone. I always say that the assurance of things hoped for is not the same as wishful thinking. I wish that chocolate ice cream did not have any calories, but it does. That's wishful thinking. That's not having faith that chocolate ice cream, it's not that good for me either, and I want that too. But Richard Rohr, who is a monk who lives in New Mexico, shares his understanding of faith in a lovely, lovely sentence. And he writes, faith is the thing which allows us to fully experience life and not to eliminate the mysterious and the problematic and the scary parts. I say, put in a more basic way, my grandfather would always say, put the feed corn where the goats can get it. And I need that. This goat needs that. Faith is the thing that helps me believe that all of the experiences I have in life, the good experiences, the challenging ones, the times when I'm really joyful and the times when I'm brokenhearted, that all of those experiences have meaning for my life. And they have a role to play in helping me become more loving and more kind and more merciful in the world. I think right now, as we watch all the trauma in Ukraine unfold, we need that kindness and that love and that empathy for each other. And faith, that hoped for, lets me realize that nothing happens in this world that isn't informative to me in some way. Nothing happens that can't change me. Because that, I think, is what I've learned from experience. Is that faith changes me, it shifts me, it invites me to come more. Because the reality is, I don't think that life is about living on a continuous loop of the same thing. We might think that, but if I had to watch like the same episode of Gilmore Girls, which yes, I realize I just laid out my age there, but think about if you could only watch one TV show for the rest of your life. How exciting is that? And how much more exciting is it when one of your friends or coworkers comes in and says, oh my gosh, have you seen this new show? I just discovered Ted Lasso, by the way. I'm very slow to the party. And I was like, this is what everybody was talking about. It's on Apple TV. I can't believe it's amazing as it is, but there you go. But I think that reminds me that faith, that thing hoped for, and that experience means that life is about stepping out. It's always about taking that next step. It's about having an adventure. It's the thing that poets and songwriters and writers and artists have tried to capture for years. The idea of stepping into the world in a different way. And not stepping into the world to check off something or to feel affirmed, but stepping into the world to step out of our comfort zones, to step out of the places that feel really, really safe. Now that is safe in like the edgy way, not safe in the go put yourself in a dangerous situation, right? Faith moves us. It moves our souls. It moves our spirits. It moves our life. And so does travel. Because whatever we do, step out, to me, the basic way we do that is travel. And one of the surest ways we do that, and we were talking about this before the camera went on, is pilgrimages. That's a word that has come into vogue now. People will take a pilgrimage somewhere. And it's not a new word. It's been around for thousands of years, maybe probably tens of thousands, because people of faith in all the major faith traditions make pilgrimages. They're basically journeys made because we're seeking something. And what we seek is very individual. Historically, they were made because somebody had maybe done something really bad and they needed to take a pilgrimage to find forgiveness. That's a mindset, thankfully, that we do not hold on into the church. Some people make a pilgrimage to mark a new or renewed dedication to God or to some aspect of their life that's important. But I think one of the best ways to make a pilgrimage is just to know that in the movement from one point to another, you're going to end up in a brand new holy place. And it's probably going to be surprising. Most pilgrims we know undertook this journey from diaries and journals that they kept because something about the steps that they took, something about the miles that they traveled and the strangeness that they would encounter in the buildings and the people and the landscape and the food, something about that would change them, hopefully for the better. My guess is that most of you are familiar with this narrative of pilgrimages called the Canterbury Tales. Many of us had to read it in high school and college, and it's by Geoffrey Chaucer, and it was written between 1387 and 1400, and it's a collection of 24 stories, and they are stories that are told by pilgrims who are walking from London to Canterbury. And at Canterbury, there's a cathedral, and in the cathedral, there's a shrine to St. Thomas Becket, who was martyred because he got crossways with political powers, but that's another talk. I've read the book in pieces and parts in high school and college, and the stories are touching and entertaining. Many of them are R-rated, which makes me wonder why children, how has HBO not picked this up yet? And they're held together by the framework of strangers essentially walking mile after mile. But in telling their stories, they also tell about themselves, about the worlds that they experience, about the impact of the pandemic of their time, known as the Black Death. We even learn about how they see God and religion. But I'd actually like to introduce you to a much earlier book about pilgrimages that most people aren't aware of. And it was written by a woman named Egeria. And we think she was a Spanish nun. And she wrote this book in the 4th century. She basically kept a journal. She traveled to the Holy Land, and she was there for 3 years. And when we read her journal, and we only unfortunately have pieces and parts of it, so we have portions that doesn't read straight through, but part of what I can tell is that she was writing to people back home. So she thought at some point somebody would read this, which we'll get to a portion of my talk, so remember that part. But we didn't know about her journal until the 19th century. And as usual, I think somewhere in England, somebody just stumbled upon an 11th century manuscript of her journal. Her journal existed from the 4th century until the 19th, and we didn't know about it. And what's important about her journal is that what you can read is how much she encountered that was so mundane. She talks about the condition of the roads. She talks about how the fish taste so much better in the Holy Land. She talks about the places that she sees people, how hot it is. But she also talks about mysterious. She talks about what it's like to be in the Holy Land and see the places where Jesus lived. She talks about meeting monks and nuns there and the encounters that she has with them and listening to them pray and sing in tunes that she's never heard. She talks about things that we might not consider important, but she writes them down because she recognized, like Richard Rohr says, the mysterious and the uncomfortable and even almost the mundane is something bigger than that. What's really important about Algeria is that for those of you who are familiar with traditions like the Episcopal Church, Lutheran, the Roman Catholic Church, and the Orthodox Church, our Holy Week celebrations of Good Friday and Maundy Thursday, they come from Algeria. We didn't know about those in the Western world until she wrote them down. A woman's travel diary of the mundane and the ordinary and even the extraordinary changed the way we worship in the church for thousands of years. I sit with that and am just sort of amazed by that, because I know when she was writing it, she couldn't have thought like, oh, this is going to change the course of Western Christendom. But it didn't matter, because she opened up the space. She let travel become more than just an accomplishment. She let it change her. And we let it change the church in some ways. Travel gives a depth of reality to all the stories we've heard and the descriptions we've read and the images we've seen. When I travel somewhere, the world is not two-dimensional. Suddenly it has smells. And I always remember if it's too hot. You can touch stones. You can sit on rocks that people sat on for thousands of years and where you go. And you also get a whole different perspective of time. I laugh that when I have been in England, I realize old to me is anything built in the 16 or 1700s. That's modern to them. Perspective is shifted. So one of the questions that travel always brings up, and that I hear when I've done this, is what is the difference between a tourist and a pilgrim? And I would argue probably not that much, except, and this is the big part, intention. Because when I am a tourist, I'm usually interested in accomplishments. We have to go see this. I want to go see this exhibit. We have to go eat at this restaurant. But when I am a pilgrim, whether that pilgrimage is to Canterbury Cathedral or to the Holy Land or even to Louisville, I am much more interested in the experience of the trip. Doesn't mean I can't have agendas, because I'm always going to have those, and I have my list of where I want to see and explore. But in that way that we make room for the mysterious, that's the place where I'll allow God to stop me and say, oh, you need to sit here for a little while longer and take this in. You need to be willing to not go there, but go here instead. I always say pilgrims are open to wandering. And while Tolkien says not all who wander are lost, I'm here to tell you that when I wander, I usually am lost. But it also creates wonderful experiences. Travel is an act of faith, gives the wanderer and the pilgrim and the traveler time and space to touch the amazing and the mysterious, and not having to figure out what it means right then, but letting time have its way. We can be awed, we can be surprised, we can even be made uncomfortable. And then we can come back to our home base where we feel safe and secure and think and reflect. So I always, when I hear these talks, think, well, that all sounds really great, which I hope it did, but by now, I hope nobody's gone, we're turning this off. American Idol's on now. I always think, well, how do you do that? Like, all that sounds really good, but like, I want a list of how we do that. So this is my list. And again, if something intrigues you, great. And if you hear all of them and go, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, totally fine with me too. But I know that when I travel, and by the way, I don't think travel means you have to go on a plane. I can find amazing things. I'm from Lexington. It is amazing what exists within an hour of my city. Kentucky is an amazing state. There are so many wonderful things here that I could go somewhere every weekend and still not see it all before I die, which I hope is a long way away. But I know that every time I step into a new place, I am changed. Maybe not right then and there. There's some places I've been that I know that the impact of being there immediately shifted me. But most places, I think, just kind of add their DNA to my spirit. And over time, I may start like, oh, that's what that was about. Intention alone shifts me if I know that I will be changed, to recognize that places are holy repositories of stories, of the lives of the people who've lived there. And I simply can't get that if I read a book, which I love reading and yay reading. There's something about being in the three dimensions of it all that changes us. I can read about coal mining all day long, but nothing impressed upon me the reality of what the world looked like for coal miners for over 200 years, like going into the restored mine in Lynch, Kentucky, which I commend, by the way, if you haven't been there. It gave me an insight and an appreciation of what hard work that is, but also the cost that it comes to people. It's a great experience that I couldn't get if I just read or watched television. And I will tell you, and my congregation will tell you this more, I've preached for over 20 years about Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. But until I was actually in the Holy Sepulchre, which is the site of his crucifixion and resurrection in Jerusalem, 2,000 years disappeared. And I was standing there in the space. And it is a very odd and weird space because they've just basically done 2,000 years of add-ons and renovations, and nobody talked to anybody else about it. But suddenly I could get a perspective of where things were. Suddenly I realized that my mind's eye, and I don't know about you all, but when I was in Sunday school, I always imagined that the crucifixion and resurrection were just miles away from each other. Because right, Jesus died. It's actually probably not much further than this room is. It's really close. That changed the whole perspective for me about what it means to hold life and death together in that way. It wasn't miles away. You could literally turn around and see it. That doesn't happen because I read Holy Scripture. It doesn't happen because I've heard a good sermon. It happens because I stood in the place. And it happens because I share the story too. I also think it's important to be willing to feel uncomfortable. That's another part, I think, between tourist and pilgrim is nobody goes on a tour to be mad or unhappy or bothered. We want to have fun. And that is a great reason to travel, by the way. So, please don't feel like you need to flagellate yourself every time you go on a trip. You don't. Because we like fun, and we like familiarity, and we like to have a good time. But sometimes we also need to be challenged and changed. We need to go to new places and hear stories, the stories of those voices we haven't heard, the stories that have been edited away. Ashland, the home of Henry Clay in Lexington, has a new tour that focuses on the lives of the enslaved people there and just how much of their ingenuity and their wisdom, their knowledge of agriculture, and their creative ways of agriculture basically helped create Henry Clay. It's amazing to me that we don't know their names, but we need to know that they were here. It's not a comfortable story, but neither is going to see the places where Japanese citizens were interred during World War II in Montana, or the memorials to the mass atrocities against Native Americans at Little Bighorn, or Black people in Tulsa, or immigrant women in the shirtwaist factory fire in New York City, or any group. But those are all stories we need to hear, and we need to remember. I think if the only reason we go to those places and see them is that we can stand there and we can touch the ground and we can say, we have not forgotten you, that is reason enough. But my experience is that every time I have gone, to one of those places, I have been immediately opened up. I have been immediately impacted by the presence of what I am witnessing. And that impact has made me more aware. I hope on my best days, it's actually made me a better person. Knowing the truth has never, ever, ever made anybody smaller and more unkind. I think travel helps us celebrate commonalities and differences. And if we've ever needed a time when we celebrate our differences, this decade is it. So one of my great theories on culture, not proven, mine alone, is that every culture on earth has a form of deep fried bread. And it's always amazing to eat. So if you've eaten beignets in New Orleans, that's deep fried bread. But they also have deep fried bread on the Navajo reservation, and they call it a taco, and it's amazing. But it's a deep fried bread. Churros are in Spain, and they're nice long pieces of deep fried bread rolled in cinnamon, and malawak in Israel. All is fried bread. Basically, it's pretty common. Flour, liquid, and grease. Lard, except in Israel. But it's also really different. They might start with the same commonalities, but their culture and tradition and resources all add to it. If we find ways to be diverse and yet appreciate the commonalities, we're already better off in our world. It helps me remember that diversity is a good thing, that hearing somebody's different experience reminds me that there's a lot of ways to get from point A to point B in the world. I always think that the world is better because we have different types of music and different types of clothing, and we pray in different ways and sing in different ways. Even the cities and states in our country have differences. And they're all worth exploring. They're all worth asking why, and not in a gather evidence to prove that my way is better than your way. But in a wow, I didn't know this was a thing. And it also gives you the opportunity to eat a lot of fried food. Which leads me to my other thing, is never miss an opportunity to share a meal, ever. Or listen to a story, or read a book, or go to a local concert, or see the parties they're throwing. Because I think that the way people celebrate their life is important. It gives us all a way to be changed. It gives us all a way to enter into the mystery that is, how are we all made up of the same cells and yet so very different in a glorious way? So I think when you go to a new town or a new state or a new country, ask a local, what's your favorite place to eat? Ask a server at a restaurant, what do you like here? Will you eat things that you will swear you'll never eat again? Absolutely. But my guess is that you're also going to eat some stuff that you had no idea you liked. I did not know that I liked octopus as much as I do. Although I'm convinced that it was because it was basically a carrier for butter and garlic. So, but I also think about the fact that you can do all of that travel right here in Kentucky, because many of our cities have wonderful ethnic restaurants and ethnic grocery stores. And if you go in and you ask, in my experience, I have learned that people all over the world love to talk about food. I always say that there is a reason that Jesus was always about eating all the time. It's what he does in the Gospels as much as he preaches. Because people love to talk about food, they love to share food, and they love to tell stories over food. I will forever hold that love means that we hear each other's stories without judgment. What do you like to talk about? Well, when you travel, ask somebody the same thing, because my guess is they're going to talk too. The other big thing is talk to museum docents and park rangers. They love to tell stories. They know where all the wonderful artwork is in museums, big ones, small ones. Park rangers in any of our national or state parks love to tell you cool stuff. And if you can find a restaurant that only takes cash and you have to turn off the dirt road to get there, I promise you it'll be some of the best barbecue you'll ever eat in your life. And I will say here, this is when I get the whole library thing. Wherever I travel, whether it be international or local, I always buy a book from a local bookstore. I go into the local bookstore and I find somebody and I ask, tell me a book that I need to read. And what is amazing is I have yet to be referred to a bad book. I always get these great books, things I would have never read before. And I like to go to the local libraries too, because if you drop in the local library, just like Trimble County, I promise you the people there will know what you need to take part in. So that's my support your local library and read books part. And the last one is to keep a record. Adjuria wrote her diary, probably never thinking that we would still be reading it now. Almost, I have to do math now, but a long time away. I like to write, but you can also take photos. We have these great phones now. You can draw pictures. You can buy postcards. You can pick up a rock, whatever, but whatever will take you back to that place, that will give you a tangible reminder of your trip and also give you the time and space to reflect on it. After you've come back to your home, you're sitting on your sofa. When you feel comfortable and safe, then you can reflect on the harder things, the challenging things. My grandmother was a committed traveler. I came by this naturally. And this was in the days before iPhones, and she didn't like cameras. She loved slides, but she'd always buy postcards and then those little travel books. I don't know if you remember, but they used to have like little tour guides. Now everything's on your phone, which is kind of a downer on that end, but they had these little tour guides. So when she died, I ended up with her treasure trove of tour booklets. And they're just hilarious. And you also see how far we've come in many years, like things that we thought were appropriate to say, or maybe not so much now. But I found her booklet on Masada. Masada is one of Herod's palaces that was built near the Dead Sea in Holy Land. Now, it was built thousands of years ago, and not much changes. The tour guide there was the one I took with me when I went, and I toured Masada with her tour guide, with her notes written in the side. And I felt all of the time between her life and death go away. I was in that space, and I will guarantee you she never thought I would do that. Maybe she did. But it's a reminder that, like Adjuria's diary and my grandmother's tour guide, that the things we record might be mundane or simply something to write down. But faith always reminds us that we never really know how what we do today will impact the future. Maybe our own future, maybe our children, maybe our grandchildren, maybe people we've never met. But faith, that hope tells us that they will. So when you travel, share your stories, write them down, tell your children, tell your friends, be surprised at what you discover. We're all invited to be pilgrims just because we're human. And pilgrims know that each step of our journey matters. The accomplishment is a small part of the goal. It's a great thing to get the shirt that says, I saw the Eiffel Tower. My grandma saw the Eiffel Tower and all I got was a stupid shirt. Surely they sell those. But what matters is the whole. The experience that keeps coming back up, that keeps reappearing, because faith reminds us that we're not here to win an award. We don't get a gold star at the end of this. Faith just says, keep exploring, keep feeling things that make you happy, make you uncomfortable, and know that all of this will come together to shift and change us. I'll end, so like everybody's like, oh, she can stop talking now. Some years ago, I was teaching a class on the Exodus, which is the journey of the Hebrew people from enslavement in Israel to freedom to the Promised Land. And I got curious as to actually how long that would have taken. So Hebrew scriptures tells us that that journey actually took 40 years. Now we know that that's probably biblical code for a long time, but it's still a long time, especially when you consider that the distance on the most direct route is 240 miles. That meant that the Hebrews averaged about 6 miles a year. Now, I would say even if we're taking a leisurely stroll and in no hurry to settle down, 6 miles a year is an incredibly slow pace. It's almost purposefully not going forward. And yet, it was important for them to go slowly, to walk. And in case you're wondering, the average human walks about 3.1 miles an hour, which is what the average horse walks too. So there's, and if they had walked for 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, they would have gotten there tomorrow. Just to give you some perspective on how long that difference is. And for the first time, I realized that there was something important about wandering. There was something important about walking slowly, about making a pilgrimage that maybe wasn't about accomplishment, but about experience. And for the Hebrews, that experience needed to form them into the people of God with whom God would eventually embrace in the covenant. But for us, I think that experience can also mean that it forms us into the people that I think humans are fully capable of being: more loving, more compassionate, more empathetic. If we just slow down, if we're not so quick to see the sights and get the selfies, but if we take time to wander, if we take time to remember that life isn't about an accomplishment, but sometimes it's about wandering, to make the pilgrimage, whether it be to the next county over or a country where we don't speak the language. I kind of think most of us today are not going to take a 40-year pilgrimage. We probably won't even take a 40-day pilgrimage. But we can make our own pilgrimages here. We can explore other counties and cities, those out-of-the-way places that your grandmother told you about. We can explore the beauty of the state of Kentucky. We can stand and listen to a river rage or water barely move. We can watch wildlife. We can sit down with really good ice cream and watch the people at a town square. My travels have invited me to discover things about myself that I'd rather ignore: prejudices, ignorances, and even flat out idiocy. But it's also reminded me that not knowing and wandering, and making pilgrimages is a good thing. Travel slows me down, slows all of us down. It lets us notice sunsets over cliffs. It lets us watch a snake slither across my path. It's a holy movement that reminds me of the power of the holiness of place and of all the stories and prayers that are spoken by the people there, and the animals and the ground and the sky and the places where we just exist. Whether we want it to be or not, our life is a collection of travels. And perhaps God or a higher power or the Great Spirit, or however we understand the world bigger than us, weaves all of those travels together and invites us to wander, to know, to not know, to explore, to experience, to breathe in and breathe out, and to learn and to laugh, and most importantly, to love. The holiness of being human speaks to us through the people and places we encounter in travel. And they tell us that we are good. The world is good. And we are part of that. Life has so much more to show us than the things we see every day. I think life and love wait for us at home and wait for us when we travel. And that's my spiel. But I'm certainly glad. And I hope you have questions, because otherwise it gets really awkward if I just have to sit here. I have no capacity to, I did talk a lot longer, but usually so my sermons on Sunday are between 10 and 12 minutes. So, but I grew up Southern Baptist, so I know when you're sitting there and you're like, and bless their hearts, they're all right here on the front row. I don't know if you can see them. So they can't slowly get their phone and look at it like we normally do when we're.
This is a pretty heavily traveled route.
Yeah, I was gonna say, of our staff,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I call myself an accidental, not unintentional traveler, because my early travels was because my parents,
Yeah.
and they were Episcopalian, and they went overseas, and they were in East Africa.
Oh, yeah.
And so actually I was thinking about travel in my case. For me, much of my travel was from home to boarding school and back again through borders as a child. And it was fearful.
Mm.
And it was, my pilgrimage, if I could ever do it, would be to revisit as an adult where I've been and see it differently with different eyes.
And feel safe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was just thinking about that. And then this morning I said to you, my mother, who's passed,
Mm-hmm.
and both my parents are gone now, but she left journals
Oh, my goodness.
of when they left the States. And I was a little baby, and she didn't write her feelings, she wrote things that happened every day. So it was more of something she could go back to and say, okay, yeah, that's the day. Sarah, who did we meet and what did we do? So it's been interesting to go through hers. I've intending to, and maybe that is a pilgrimage too, to go through her journals and kind of transcribe them for my siblings.
Absolutely.
Because I'm the one that's keeping them right now.
I think one of the one of the great things about travel, especially if you go back to a place you went as a child, and see how the world changes. I remember going to Rock City as a child, and there's a swing. Yeah, because we all went and there was a swinging bridge that just terrified. I wouldn't go across it.
Yeah.
And then I went back as an adult, and it's 4 feet off the ground. But it's amazing because that reminds me, it's children's perspective is not a grown-up's perspective. And that, I think about that experience, and that when I talk to children or listen to them, that really, it's not helpful to say, oh, don't be scared of that, because that 4 feet was a long way when I was 6 years old. But I just think that perspective is a really wonderful thing, to be able to go back to places that you went as a kid.
I'll say I was 18 when I left. So
yeah, but
I developed a little more at easeness.
Mm-hmm.
It was let's just go through the borders. Let's just do this. And I did enjoy much of that, what I got to experience by accident, and then they always tried to do a trip on the way back to the States. Every 4 years, they would make sure we stopped different countries. And so that was more of the touristy type thing. The rest was just how our life was, But in the United States was a whole new different thing.
Yeah, I imagine.
Yeah. So now their experiences through military.
So I was a military brat. So I was born in Alabama, lived, and then when my father came out of the military, we were in Mississippi. So I was thinking that military movement gives you difference, because you really are on base. I mean, you're in sort of cloistered area that's a little different than being dropped in the middle of nowhere.
We were, Dad was stationed overseas, we were out on the economy, so
Mm.
that was interesting.
I think, one of the things that I love about I mean, it's got its downsides, but the fact that, you can, through like Airbnb and places, you can actually stay in neighborhoods, you're not sort of limited to big hotels and tourist centers, you can actually stay in somebody's home. And I just think that just opens up a whole nother level of experiencing what it's like to actually, live somewhere. And
That is true.
We stayed in upstairs of a home in Budapest,
oh, goodness.
in a neighborhood. And the dear lady spoke no English, we spoke no Hungarian, and we show up and she was just speaking so kindly and welcoming and warm, and we had no way of communicating other than just really looks on, and we get into her upstairs apartment and it smelled just like my grandma's.
Mhm.
And we're at home.
Yeah.
No problem there, it was just lovely.
Going to countries where I don't speak the language. I mean, and I have sort of, like I tell people, the languages I actually have some competency in are dead languages, so that I'm no use. But it is, first of all, it certainly has opened up my eyes to how hard it is to be an immigrant or a refugee, to come from a country. Yeah. And my church does a lot of work with Kentucky Refugee Ministries, but to come to a country where you don't speak the language and then to unfortunately run into people who think that, you should be condemned for that. And I always think, I'm so thankful for the times I've been in countries where I didn't speak the language, that people were compassionate. And you're right, you can communicate, signing things and yeah, talking about, you can get a lot done with that. But again, it's that my experience in that has invited me to think, and what must it be like to be in the United States and not have a really clear grasp of English? And so how do I then love my neighbor in that way? And again, you can get a lot done by showing pictures, and I mean, Google Translate is your friend in a lot of ways.
It's gotten better.
An experience I remember when I was back in 18 was not being used to American money. And I remember
Mhm.
not approaching the cash register, but out trying to figure it out, and just that, nervousness. a little
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah,
It
I
worked
had
out.
that too. I
Did
came,
you?
I
It was
came
a
back
little
from,
bit of a jolt.
yeah, I came back from college and
Yeah.
bought food, and I got up to the cashier and realized I couldn't remember what any of the US
Yeah.
denominations were worth.
All what the queens
And I
were.
just held it out to him,
Uh,
and he goes, "Are you German?"
Yeah.
And I said, "Yeah."
And isn't it surprising? Like, I mean, I tell people, for all of the news I hear, I really firmly believe in the goodness of humans, because my experiences when I have not known, money, that they don't cheat,
Yeah, they're good.
I went to, pardon?
Well,
Not so good in Paris.
Well, I actually think the bigger cities are a little more challenging. But when I was in Jerusalem, I went to the convent in St. Mary Magdalene, and it's a I think it's a Russian Orthodox convent, but it is cloistered. I mean, like they only open the gate for a certain number of hours. So we were there, went in, and first of all, I'm having to deal with Israeli money, which I kind of, and so not only that, but the sister that was at the little kiosk where you could buy candles to go, light in front of the icons, spoke a Slavic language. I'm going to assume Russian, but I don't know that. And I thought, oh, and so I just threw a bunch of coins out on the because I was like, and she counts it out. She hands me 3 candles because we got that far. And then she hands me a vial of holy oil. And I thought, well, I didn't know I needed this, but apparently I do. So I take my holy oil and all my, my money back. And then what was so funny about it is that when I got back and, I guess maybe about 6 months after the trip, I found the holy oil. And I'm from a tradition that anoints people who are sick and also who are dying. And I had run out and I was like, and there's that holy oil. And I thought, wow, maybe she knew, I don't know. But I just love that. And she counts it back. Like clearly she's like, and you need the oil too. So, but I just think getting out of our routine, and it also makes me really happy to come home too. I mean, I think my home is never as wonderful as it is the day or two I get back from traveling, because like, oh, this is my space too. And I think our homes give us that place where we, can reflect and can make notes about things and can write, in journals or draw or whatever we want to do, or, go back through our photos. But it is really, I think that, some people are cut out to be vagabonds. I'm not, but because I like being able to come home and sort of let the experiences wash over me.
Mhm. Well, until I had my grand return, I'm really into travel YouTube to people that travel, and they do episodes on their travels on it. I don't know, I'm just almost addicted.
It's so much fun to watch. I mean, I do think now we don't have to go on. I mean, I think of Egeria, she goes for 3 years. I mean, there's some indication she probably had some wealth to do that, but that was probably pretty normal because you didn't just get on an airplane and go there. It was overland and dangerous. But I'm always impressed at the amount that we can watch now on television. I mean, it really does give us, so we have some sense about what we're going to see, before we go somewhere. But I love Rick Steves on PBS. I mean, I just, and I will, and the other thing I'll say too, especially, I think some of the tours that they have now, I mean, I've done a Rick Steves tour. There are a lot of really good tours out there that are wonderful. I mean, I don't think you just have to go off on your own I mean, there are plenty of great organizations out there doing stuff that you can, Google. I mean, we were talking earlier about the Camino, which is a pilgrim's trail. And that's interesting, is like we have in our minds like a pilgrim's trail, like the Canterbury, like it's one, and it's not. There's all kinds of offshoots and stuff. So the Camino is some ridiculous number of possibilities that all end up at the Cathedral of St. James, and there's a lot of good organizations that will help you out, especially if you're single or if you really don't know what you're doing, which is me most of the time. So I would say never ever think that it's not real travel if I do a tour group. It's great, especially if the tour group, and this is kind of one of my, makes sure that you have free time, that you don't just have everything booked, that you actually have free time to go back and explore what you want to see.
Another travel, it's not my experience, my daughter's, she had a divorce, and so she and a really close teacher friend did a month in Europe and did their thing over there. They spoke about this van tour they took, and it was a large van and packed with people. It was a rock and something, I'm not even going to say where they stopped, the place they stopped, but in this little van that took about 2 weeks, this little clan of people in this van was quite, and so they kept track of each other on Facebook. Australia, New Zealand, there's a mother-daughter.
Always, everywhere I go, I run into Australia.
Mother-daughter couple, there was Pat friends, there was all different kind of, and I just thought, well, that could be a story right there. Someone could write a story.
Like I said, I think, travel groups, tour groups are wonderful ways, especially if you're going. And I said this, there's a lot of really great countries out there to go.
And that wasn't a thought, like they weren't meditating.
Yeah, no, you don't have to. I mean,
it was also for her a switch over in her life. So.
I'm a big believer that whenever we go through, and again, it's roots back into why people took pilgrimage to begin with. I think whenever we go through a substantial change in our life, a divorce, death of a close person, person in your life, a really significant change. I think travel and pilgrimages are wonderful ways to sort of transition. It's so much better than sort of making perhaps other decisions that aren't as helpful, like, I'm going to marry the first person I see or whatever. So, yeah. So I think that, because I think it does, it gives you a space of transition. And when you come back, you're not the same person you were when you left on many levels. And so I think that, I really wish that we sort of had the language of pilgrimage and we talked about that more than we do. And there's, again, I just go back to that. There's great ways, because I realize traveling overseas is not accessible to everybody. I think it's more accessible than people sometimes think it is. But there's so much amazing just within, a 3-hour or 5-hour drive of wherever we are in Kentucky, whether Lexington, Louisville, ever. I mean, I have a friend of mine whose son is tremendously into Indian mounds. I didn't know there were that many in Kentucky. And you think it's just, it's an Indian mound, but they're all different. And it's fascinating to me how they're different. And again, it gives me a perspective of time. Wow, the oldest building we have to Kentucky is from, the 16th. No, the oldest structure we have in Kentucky is so I think that's just a really wonderful part of what travel does for me, is opens up the perspective of this land is really old and people's stories are in the soil from tens of thousands of years. It didn't all just start with Daniel Boone. An important part, but that's not the only story. So, okay.
I went down to, talking about places in Kentucky, I went down to the Breaks.
Yeah.
That was just moving. Being there and seeing the sun rise and set and go across the mountains